An update now to a story the News4JAX I-Team has been following involving hundreds of malpractice lawsuits against a former orthopedic surgeon at Ascension St. Vincent's Riverside Hospital. Tonight, we're hearing from another former patient of Dr. David Heekins. The doctor's accused of operating on patients while he had a progressive neurological condition that caused him to lose his balance and slur his speech. The lawsuit also claims the hospital knew about his impairment but let him continue to perform surgery. I-Team investigator Ann Maxwell spoke with a patient today who said she had a knee replacement with Dr. Heekin years ago, but Ann, when she went back to have a knee replacement on the other leg, she noticed something different about it.
Yeah, Joy, she says that knee replacement here at Ascension St. Vincent's left one of her legs longer than the other, seriously impacting her life. She says she brought up concerns about the doctor's demeanor before the surgery to another healthcare worker who was in an appointment with her. She says they insisted the doctor was fine.
Jacqueline Rivera has scars on both knees from surgeries decades apart. She says the scar on her right knee is from the 90s, the result of a knee replacement with Dr. David Heekin.
He was amazing.
The scar on her other knee is wider and longer, the result, she says, of a botched procedure by that same doctor 2 decades later.
He was amazing back then. I just don't know what happened now.
She says when she went back to Dr. Heekin for a pre-operation appointment in 2019, he was different.
That's when I noticed his slurred speech. His eye movement was very slow.
She says she confronted the other healthcare worker in the room about it.
I took my finger and pushed her up against the wall and said, "You need to tell me what's going on with Dr. Heekin now." And she was like, "There's nothing, he's fine, he's fine."
She says after the surgery, she was left dragging her leg.
I know my body, and something just wasn't right.
How did that affect your life?
Girl, bad. I mean, my back, I had 3 bulging discs. One of them exploded. I had to have surgery on my back.
About a year later, she sought a second opinion at another practice. She says that doctor had to perform another surgery because Dr. Heekin's surgery left her left leg longer than her right leg.
I was just shocked.
Now she's one of hundreds of patients suing Dr. Heekin and Ascension St. Vincent's, claiming he operated with a neurological condition that affected his functioning and that the hospital didn't stop him.
It's just heartbreaking. You know, that we trust these hospitals, we trust our doctors. You know, they're all we got. You know, and you know that. But you gonna take advantage of your patients in that way? Come on. In the hospital, you worrying about your bottom line instead of the patient's health?
She says 3 years later, her knee continues to bother her. She can't go a long time standing on it anymore. Dr. Heekin is no longer practicing. Tonight, an attorney for Ascension St. Vincent's declined to comment. We haven't heard back from attorneys for Dr. Heekin, but we'll let you know if we do. Live in Riverside, Ann Maxwell, Channel 4, the local station.
An update now on an I-Team investigation into former Ascension St. Vincent's orthopedic surgeon Dr. David Heekin. He's accused of botching hundreds of surgeries. Lawsuits allege that he operated on patients while he had a progressive neurological condition. The plaintiffs say numerous healthcare employees and patients noticed his slurred speech, that he lost his balance and showed poor judgment and mood disturbances. I-Team investigator Ann Maxwell is joining us now live with the update. Ann.
Mary, tonight the I-Team has obtained audio recordings cited by the plaintiffs in recently filed court documents that reportedly shows the doctor slurring his speech during an office visit, as well as video from a deposition that shows Dr. Heekin appearing disoriented, slurring his words and having outbursts just months after his last operations. We've also obtained hundreds of pages of documents plaintiffs say show hospital leadership was aware of issues with Dr. Heekin for years, but continued to allow him to operate severely injuring patients.
Plaintiffs' attorneys are asking for permission to seek punitive damages against St. Vincent's Medical Center, laying out their evidence in nearly 500 pages detailing botched surgeries, erratic behavior from the doctor, and documents suggesting leadership at the hospital were alerted about his unfitness to operate. The plaintiffs say Dr. David Heekin became the founder and director of St. Vincent's Orthopedic Center of Excellence around 2012. This video was cited in their request to the court seeking permission to pursue punitive damages.
Hi, I'm Dr. David Heekin, Medical Director of the Orthopedic Center of Excellence at St. Vincent's. Once known as an older man's surgery, hip replacements have become well, hip.
The plaintiffs allege the doctor changed when he got sick with a progressive neurological condition, but continued to operate for years, causing hundreds of devastating injuries on patients from 2016 to 2020. Plaintiffs allege this audio recording of Dr. Heekin is from an office visit from February of 2019.
When do we put when do we do the IND and put that wound vac on it?
Put it on January 27th.
Court records showed this deposition of Dr. Heekin was taken for a medical malpractice lawsuit in August of 2020. He had retired earlier that year.
Doctor, I apologize for asking, but have you been diagnosed with a medical condition that makes it difficult for you to express your testimony today?
Yes.
Does your medical condition, did that play some role in your decision to retire?
Yes.
Hundreds of lawsuits allege Dr. Heekin would lose his temper and intimidate other healthcare providers at St. Vincent's, often using inappropriate language that was consistent with a lack of impulse control. Here's the 2020 deposition again.
Was your answer before that because my office screwed up?
I thought you couldn't understand that.
I'm just clarifying it. You were shouting and I had difficulty understanding it, that's all. Did you work July 4, 2019?
Oh. What'd you have for dinner? I don't know.
The plaintiffs allege independent orthopedic doctors in the area saw so many inexplicably devastated patients of Dr. Heekin's that one of them reached out to St. Vincent's leadership, texting the CEO in January of 2020. We're seeing a large uptake of severe complications from Dr. Heekin. These patients will end up with above-knee amputations and girdle stones. That's a salvage procedure the plaintiffs say essentially permanently confines patients to a wheelchair. He goes on to say, I'm going to stop seeing his patients because I can't take care of them all. The CEO responded it's important to investigate and said he'd put the doctor in touch with St. Vincent's chief medical officer. However, lawsuits allege Dr. Heekin continued performing surgeries that harmed patients at the hospital for months. 4 days later, plaintiffs say employees texted each other asking how many revisions do you think a certain doctor does of Heekin's cases, and saying, quote, no one is doing anything about it. He is out of his mind today. He's so confused. His entire room thinks he's fine, and the clinical coordinator thinks he's fine. He can't form a full sentence. But even before then, the plaintiffs say leadership knew of possible issues, with the chief nursing officer saying in a deposition that the chief medical officer was alerted about the doctor soiling himself in an airport in 2018, but she wasn't aware of any call to action. It's also alleged that in September of 2019, Dr. Heekin crashed into a parked car in broad daylight on a clear day in the parking lot at St. Vincent's and performed surgeries that same day, including on Jacqueline Rivera, who previously told the I-Team the knee replacement left her legs different lengths. The plaintiffs say the evidence is clear. The hospital knew Dr. Heekin wasn't fit to perform surgeries in his final years there, but they continued to let him operate.
Plaintiffs also allege the hospital disregarded patients' complaints, saying the doctor was an independent contractor. The hospital will have a chance to respond to the plaintiffs' request for punitive damages. Court records show they have not filed that response yet. But in other court records, the hospital has denied allegations of wrongdoing and filed its own cross-claim against Dr. Heekin and the Heekin Clinic, alleging the doctor, not the hospital, should be liable to the plaintiffs for damages. An attorney representing St. Vincent's declined to comment tonight. We have not yet heard back today from attorneys for Dr. Heekin and the Heekin Clinic. For now, I'm Ann Maxwell, Channel 4, the local station.
New at 6 o'clock, legal filings from the Florida Division of Administrative Hearings show St. Vincent's Medical Center has agreed to accept liability and participate in arbitration proceedings for the purpose of determining damage amounts in at least a few of the hundreds of lawsuits filed against the health system and against a former orthopedic surgeon there. Other patients whose lawsuits are pending in civil court accuse Dr. David Heekin of causing hundreds of devastating injuries during knee and hip replacements because he was operating while impaired by a progressive neurological condition from 2016 to 2020, and that the hospital knew that he was impaired but did not protect patients. The hospital has denied wrongdoing. News4JAX I-Team investigator Ann Maxwell has obtained a lot of new information on these cases. Ann?
Tom, tonight we've obtained video of Dr. Heekin from a 2019 deposition while he was still practicing medicine that shows him slurring his speech, a symptom plaintiffs allege was caused by progressive supranuclear palsy. We've also obtained the transcripts of depositions given by St. Vincent's chief medical officer and former director of surgical services. And their depositions both testified about the concerns brought to them about Dr. Heekin and how they reacted.
This deposition shows Dr. David Heakin in August of 2019 testifying as an expert witness. He was a practicing orthopedic surgeon at Ascension St. Vincent's Riverside Hospital at the time.
What was the next step that was taken to try to solve the problem?
Well, we had a patient that had pain, had a lawsuit pending, and that nothing wrong with that. I understand, but lawsuit pending, had pain.
Dr. Heakin is also heard slurring his speech in an audio clip from February of 2019. Plaintiffs allege this was recorded by a patient.
When do we put that? When do we do the IND and put that wound vac on it?
They put it on January 26th.
St. Vincent's Medical Center's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jeff Matheson, was shown those audio and video clips during his 2021 deposition. He said, "I did not hear a difference in that audio from what I normally hear of Dr. Heakin," and that the video clip was consistent in how he remembered Dr. Heakin from 2018. This video of Dr. Heakin is from a deposition taken in August of 2020, a few months after he retired.
Did you work July 4, 2019?
Oh no. What'd you have for dinner? I don't know.
In his deposition, Dr. Matheson says Dr. Heakin was known for outbursts from before 2018 when he arrived at the hospital. Dr. Heakin is now accused of botching hundreds of surgeries from 2016 to 2020, with plaintiffs alleging he was impaired by progressive supranuclear palsy, which according to the Mayo Clinic is a rare brain disorder caused by brain cell deterioration that worsens over time. Signs and symptoms include loss of balance and poor eye movement, in addition to slurred speech, impulsive behavior, and cognitive difficulties, which may mimic Parkinson's and dementia. According to the former director of surgical services at St. Vincent's Riverside, Don Galloway, Dr. Heakin's decline was discussed among healthcare providers at the hospital, with multiple people bringing complaints about him, including concerns he was impaired, not the same surgeon, and a shell of the man he once was. He says he was also alerted to concerns about the doctor's speech, gait, and overall affect. Galloway says he did not notice any changes in Heakin's physical or mental abilities when he first met him in September of 2019 to when Heakin retired in April of 2020. The CMO testified that he relied on operating room leadership like Galloway to raise issues to him. But Galloway's deposition testimony reflects that he dismissed some nurses and surgical technicians' concerns about Heakin as hearsay or gossip that was emotional or dramatic, saying he needed to assess complaints before taking them to the CMO. He said he would spend about 5 or 6 minutes in the OR with Dr. Heakin to determine whether any concerns were apparent, and if he didn't see anything abnormal, no concerns would be reported. Galloway also testified in his deposition one of his responsibilities was to generate case volume, figuring out how to do more cases in a day. And he spoke to the CEO in March of 2020 about a revenue victory, saying surgical services had a record month. The CMO testified that he initiated an investigation into Heakin's conduct in September of 2019, when a surgery of Dr. Heakin's was canceled after the patient's family said they didn't feel comfortable with him operating because he looked tired and wasn't making sense. The CMO testified that he immediately activated the medical staff licensed practitioner health committee, which remained active through the rest of Dr. Heakin's career. He also testified he told Dr. Heakin that he needed to voluntarily stop doing surgery in the facility until they could adequately investigate. He testified Dr. Heakin was cleared to practice by a neurologist on October 6th. After that, plaintiffs allege healthcare providers continued to complain about Dr. Heakin, with the director of surgical services, Don Galloway, saying a robot was brought in to help Dr. Heakin operate near the end of his career because there were concerns about his surgical outcomes. Galloway also testified that the CMO told him he hoped COVID would lead Dr. Heakin to retire.
Galloway says Heakin carried weight at St. Vincent's and that, quote, the hospital was built around Dr. Heakin's clinic. He also said the patient should be the one to determine if a surgeon is impaired. He also said diagnosing a physician's underlying neurological condition is something a specialist would have to determine through tests. Records show St. Vincent's has accepted liability in some cases and agreed to participate in arbitration to determine the appropriate damage amounts. But in court records on a different case, the hospital has denied allegations of wrongdoing and filed its own cross-claim against Dr. Heakin and the Heakin Clinic, alleging the doctor and not the hospital should be liable to the plaintiffs for any damages. An attorney for St. Vincent's declined to comment today, and we have not heard back from attorneys for Dr. Heakin and the Heakin Clinic.
An update now to a News4JAX I-team investigation into hundreds of lawsuits filed against Ascension St. Vincent's and a former orthopedic surgeon. Dr. David Heakin is accused of botching surgeries while he was allegedly impaired by a progressive neurological condition that caused him to slur his speech and lose his balance. The lawsuits claim this resulted in devastating injuries, and in one case, the death of a 70-year-old patient undergoing a hip replacement. Tonight, her widower sat down for his first TV interview with the I-team.
I happen to be part of it. I just don't know the circumstances behind any of those. I just know that I lost a wife.
I-team investigator Ann Maxwell joins us now with their story. Ann.
Mary, 4 years later, Anthony Bonk still struggles to talk about what happened. He said he and his wife Cindy were loving retirement. They'd lived frugally and were looking forward to spending the next years traveling, spending time with friends and family. But that was cut short. And Bonk says he's bitter that for years, nobody stopped this doctor.
And this one here was 3 months before Cindy's life was taken.
Anthony and Cindy Bonk were married 42 years.
It was a wonderful life.
Cindy was a speech and language pathologist, a golfer, water skier, snow skier, a stepmother of 2 boys, and nana to 4 grandchildren.
My boys are having the toughest time with it, and that was their stepmom, but she was a wonderful stepmom.
In 2018, she went in for a hip replacement after a fall. The couple turned to Dr. David Heakin, an accomplished orthopedic surgeon at Ascension St. Vincent's.
He said, I'll have you up and walking. The surgery should take about 45 minutes to an hour. I'll have you up walking that day.
But after 6 hours in surgery, Cindy was dead.
And a nurse came out and she says, we've lost her, but you're welcome to come in and say your goodbyes.
That must have just been devastating.
Yes. Still is. You know, when you reconstruct it now, it's still the same.
Cindy's death certificate says she died after complications from a femur fracture.
Did the doctor come speak to you?
Never. Never. Never.
Bonk's and hundreds of other lawsuits allege leadership at St. Vincent's knew or should have known Dr. Heakin wasn't fit to perform surgeries, but let him continue to operate. Court records show St. Vincent's has accepted liability in some of those lawsuits while denying wrongdoing in others. A few weeks ago, an appeals court denied a request based on privacy concerns to protect more than 2,700 text messages making reference to Dr. Heakin on the phones of St. Vincent's employees from disclosure and discovery.
My heart's about to jump out here. 27, this is the first I've heard 2,700. To heard of any text messages.
So far, 403 lawsuits have been filed.
An attorney for St. Vincent's declined to comment tonight. We've not yet heard back from attorneys for Dr. Heakin and the Heakin Clinic, but in court filings, they denied wrongdoing in Bonk's case. As for those text messages, the St. Vincent's employees are planning to ask the appeals court to rehear their argument, according to a court filing. We'll have more on that legal battle tomorrow evening. From the studio, Ann Maxwell, Channel 4, the local station.